Hello, fellow ducklings, and welcome back to another episode of Language Learning for Pretty Birds. Today's episode is about grammar, more specifically, how we think about grammar and how that gets in our way. Now, I'm a dweeb, and I find grammar fascinating. But even if you're not a dweeb, or if you're a dweeb of a different bent, I think you'll find this episode interesting. I'm going to demonstrate that grammar isn't real, and in doing so, show you that studying grammar isn't the same as studying language. And as always, I'll be giving you some practical advice. So let's go. Part 1, Implicit versus Explicit Knowledge. Babies have the luxury of skipping explicit grammar instruction. They don't study grammar formally in order to learn to speak, but rather absorb the rules through immersion at the critical period of cognitive development. As adults, we usually have to do a fair bit of studying to catch up to them. But even though for us, learning grammar rules is a necessary step to learning the language, it isn't actually learning the language. It's learning about the language. It's explicit knowledge, as opposed to the implicit knowledge we acquired as babies. I'm going to demonstrate the difference using some English sentences, with apologies to non-native English speakers for whom this experiment may not land. Sentence 1. If I get paid tomorrow, I will take you out to lunch. Sentence 2. If I got paid tomorrow, I would take you out to lunch. Now, which sentence implies the possibility of lunch? Most native English speakers would tell me that the first one implies that I might get paid tomorrow, but that the second sentence doesn't. But would you be able to give me a technical explanation as to why? Explicit grammar instruction tells you that both of these are hypotheticals, but that the first sentence is in the indicative mood. The second sentence uses the subjunctive in the first clause, followed by a conditional clause, to create a contrary to fact hypothetical. But native speakers of English aren't necessarily taught that. Many don't even know that English has a subjunctive mood, and find it mystifying when they encounter it in a foreign language class. They're not consciously aware that they're using a past tense form, I got paid, to talk about the future. They just intuitively know that if I got paid tomorrow is describing an impossibility, an alternate dimension. Cool, huh? So, we see that the implicit, unconscious ability to differentiate between if I get paid and if I got paid doesn't translate to an explicit knowledge or even awareness of how the subjunctive mood is formed and used in English. Likewise, explicit knowledge, a technical explanation of how it works, doesn't translate on its own to the implicit, unconscious knowledge of the proficient speaker. In other words, being able to use the subjunctive doesn't mean you understand the subjunctive. And understanding the subjunctive doesn't mean you can use it. It goes both ways. Keep this limitation in mind as you study grammar, and don't beat up on yourself. It's normal. Later in the series, I'll show you the activities you need to do to transform the raw materials of vocabulary and grammar into working language, and those activities are the most fun. But first, we have to take a look at what grammar is and isn't. And one thing grammar isn't is real. Part 2. Grammar isn't real. I've noticed over the years that ducklings find grammar daunting in part because consciously or not, they expect it to make sense. This is understandable, but gives grammar too much credit. Grammar is not meaningful in itself. It is a set of operating instructions for creating meaning. Let's look at an example which will allow me the indulgence of teaching you a touch of Italian. La mia famiglia è grande. My family is big. Now, la famiglia is a feminine singular noun, but a very common error my ducklings make is saying something like La mia famiglia sono grande, or La mia famiglia siamo grande, literally, my family are big, or my family we are big, because it refers to a group of people, right? but grammatically, it's singular. Why? Because grammar isn't real. And keep in mind, family is also singular in English. So you see, grammar is tricky even when encountering structures we have in our native language, because we're having to reverse engineer the process that made my family is make intuitive sense in English. We're thinking conceptually in ways we never have about our native language, but the concepts we're looking for just aren't there in any language. This can get people very hung up on ideas like grammatical gender. What makes a table feminine or an underpass masculine? Nothing. The conflation of grammatical gender and social gender has led to a lot of folklore and bullshit listicle articles about the ways different cultures perceive the world. But really, gender is just an outdated term for what we now call noun class, groups of nouns that follow a pattern. And these patterns are based on sounds, often patterns of sounds that are obscured by having originated in a proto-language and carried through regardless of phonological changes over the centuries. Regular Italian verbs are categorized as first conjugation, second conjugation, or third conjugation, or verbs in are, ere, and ire, and nobody gets worked up about that. But the term gender is so loaded that it prompts us to try to find meaning in it when there just isn't any, because grammar isn't real. So, try to resist the urge to analyze grammar itself for meaning. There isn't any in there, so trying to find it is folly. There are patterns, but no logic. Grammar isn't real. It does not reflect any hidden meaning or underlying worldview in its speakers, and all languages are equally capable of expressing anything. Grammar is merely the particular ways words fit together for achieving that expression. We may find those ways charming, odd, or nonsensical, but they are just as invisible to their native speakers as using the past to refer to an impossible future is to native speakers of English. Incidentally, this is one reason why arguments over the use of singular they are ridiculous. It doesn't matter whether singular they is grammatical or not because grammar isn't real. People are real. Don't be a shitbag. Part 3. Approaching Grammar. So, with all this in mind, how do we approach learning grammar? As independent learners, we'll usually have to take an old-fashioned systematic approach by following lessons from books or videos, at least at first. My advice is to choose one or more of these that you like and follow the lessons and activities with a practicum mindset, using the memorization techniques from the last video. As you go through these lessons, keep this in mind. Focus on form. Forms are words and their iterations. For example, falcon and falcons are the singular and plural forms, respectively, of the word falcon. Hunt, hunts, hunted, hunting are all forms of the verb to hunt. Learning forms is a question of memorization. Forms exist in relation to rules that tell you that the falcon hunts, but the falcons hunt. Knowing which form to use is a question of memorization and understanding the rule. But focusing on form does a few things for you. First, you can be far more sure of vocabulary than of grammar you learn on your own. Rote memorization of a word just has less possibility of baking in a misunderstanding early. Second, forms create meaning in grammatical context, so ducklings often figure out the grammar rule by memorizing enough forms that it begins to make sense the more they see it in that context. And finally, it means that you have your tools sharp and ready to go when it's time to use the material. Even if you're shaky on a grammar rule, you at least have a real word to plug into a structure, and a better chance of landing on the right one or making yourself understood with the wrong one. So, memorize the ever-loving shit out of your forms. Get them so solid that I could shake you awake in the middle of the night and say io, and before you fully came to, you'd reflexively say sono. Next, it can be helpful to learn a little jargon. If you found the technical explanation for the English subjunctive mystifying, you're not alone. especially if you received your early education in the United States. Most U.S. Americans aren't taught formal grammar and only encounter it in the context of a foreign language class, essentially doubling the material that they have to learn about grammar and putting them at a big disadvantage. A basic foundation in grammar will help you understand explicit grammar instruction and any instruction you receive in the target language, because background knowledge always boosts comprehension. More on that in a future video. Remember that you learn best what you already know. So, an explicit understanding of what you already know, that is, your native language, can be a bridge towards explicit understanding in the target language, which in turn is the foundation for the implicit knowledge that we're aiming for in language acquisition. Learning as adults is nothing if not a journey, so I say enjoy the ride and the enrichment that comes from learning more about your world along the way. To start, at least know the parts of speech, what a conjugation is, and basic terms like that. I recommend the book English Grammar for Students of Chinese, or for students of whatever language you're studying. It's a huge series with editions in many, many languages. And if you want a fun and engrossing guide to English grammar, I can't recommend The Transitive Vampire enough, and would recommend it even if you weren't using it to study something else. It's loads of fun. So, to summarize, first, explicit knowledge does not equal implicit knowledge, and vice versa, or as we say in Italian, viceversa. Grammar isn't real, and study grammar anyway. Focus on your forms and learn an overview of what grammar is and what it does. In upcoming videos, I'll be showing you how to take the building blocks of grammar and vocabulary and use them to create the functional language system that real proficiency aims for. To render the explicit implicit, to render conscious knowledge into unconscious mastery. It'll involve that conveyor belt, but look forward to it. It'll also be way less work than all the studying you're doing now. Thanks as always to the lovely people who created these PowerPoint slides. Hit me up on Discord if you need anything, and I'll see you in class.